The message came at 3 in the morning, Earth time. Daniel Carter was sleeping in his small apartment in Geneva when his communication device began to flash with urgent red light. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling for a moment before reaching for it. The words on the screen made his blood run cold. He was being summoned to Keth Prime, the capital world of the Valorian Empire. The message gave no reason. It simply demanded his presence within 48 hours. Daniel sat up in bed and rubbed his face with both hands. He had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Concord for 3 years now. In that time, he had learned one important truth. When the Valorians summoned you, it was never good news. He got dressed quickly and made his way to the United Earth Government headquarters. The building was mostly dark at this hour, but lights burned in the offices of the Secretary General. She was already waiting for him when he arrived. Margaret Cole was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes. She had led Earth's government through the difficult years of first contact and integration into galactic society. Nothing surprised her anymore. "You saw the message," she said. It was not a question. Daniel nodded. "Any idea what this is about?" Margaret handed him a tablet. "We lost contact with the Seraph 7 colony 6 hours ago. All communication channels are dead. Our ships in the area report that the colony is simply gone." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "I mean, there is nothing left. The entire settlement has been destroyed. 12,000 colonists, Daniel. Men, women, children. All of them." Daniel sat down heavily in the nearest chair. He had visited Seraph 7 2 years ago. He remembered the hopeful faces of the settlers, the children playing in the biodomes, the dreams of a new life on a distant moon. Who did this? He asked, though some part of him already knew the answer. "We believe it was the Valorians," Margaret said quietly. "And now they are summoning you to their capital. I think we both know why." Daniel closed his eyes. The Valorians had ruled this part of the galaxy for 3,000 years. They saw themselves as the rightful masters of all lesser species. Humanity had only been part of the Galactic Concord for 20 years. To the Valorians, humans were nothing more than insects who had recently learned to crawl among the stars. "They want me to apologize," Daniel said bitterly. "They murdered 12,000 people, and they want us to say sorry." "Probably," Margaret agreed. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. He had served in Earth's Navy for 15 years before becoming a diplomat. He had seen combat. He understood violence. But he also understood the reality of their situation. Earth had 60 warships. The Valorian Empire had thousands. "I will go," he said finally. "I will hear what they have to say. But I'm not going to grovel, Margaret. Not for this." She nodded slowly. "Be careful, Daniel. The Valorians do not forgive defiance." "Neither do I," he replied. The Earth vessel Resolute departed from orbit 6 hours later. It was a diplomatic ship, small and fast, designed for speed rather than combat. Daniel stood on the bridge as they entered the jump gate that would carry them across the stars. Lieutenant Katie Morgan stood beside him. She was young, maybe 28, with brown hair tied back in a practical knot. She had been his aide for 2 years and had proven herself smart and loyal. "Sir," she said quietly, "I have been reading the intelligence reports on the Valorians. Their treatment of subordinate species is not pleasant." Daniel nodded. "I know. They see the galaxy as their property. Everything and everyone exists to serve them." "Then why are we going?" Katie asked. "Why not refuse the summons?" "Because if we refuse, they will use it as an excuse for more violence," Daniel explained. "And because I need to look them in the eye when I tell them what I think of their actions." Katie was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Commander Brooks thinks we should bring more security." Daniel glanced toward the rear of the bridge, where Commander Nathan Brooks was checking his weapon for the third time. Nathan was a big man with a scarred face and the cold eyes of a professional soldier. He had insisted on coming along, and Daniel had not argued. "Nathan thinks everyone should bring more security," Daniel said with a small smile. "But he is probably right. The Valorians are not known for their hospitality." The journey to Keth Prime took 4 days. Daniel spent most of that time reviewing everything he knew about Valorian law and custom. He studied their history, their leaders, their weaknesses. He prepared arguments and counter-arguments. He practiced staying calm in the face of insults. When the Resolute finally emerged from the jump gate near Keth Prime, Daniel was standing at the viewport. The Valorian homeworld hung in space before him, a massive planet of red and orange, surrounded by defense platforms and warships. "They have 50 ships in orbit," Nathan reported from his station. "All of them have weapons locked on us." "Standard welcome for visitors," Daniel said dryly. "Take us in, Helm." Nice and slow. They landed at the main spaceport and were immediately surrounded by Valorian soldiers. The aliens were tall, nearly 8 feet, with scaled skin and yellow eyes. They moved with the easy confidence of predators who had never known fear. A Valorian official approached Daniel and spoke in the harsh, clicking language of his people. The translation device in Daniel's ear converted it to English. "Ambassador Carter, you will come with us. The High Tribunal is waiting." Daniel straightened his uniform and nodded. "Lead the way." They were taken to a holding chamber and left there for 6 hours. No food, no water, no explanation. The message was clear. Humans were not worthy of basic courtesy. Katie paced the small room with growing frustration. "This is deliberate," she said. "They are trying to make us angry." "I know," Daniel replied calmly. "And we are not going to give them the satisfaction." Nathan stood by the door, his hand never far from his weapon. "I do not like this, Ambassador. Something feels wrong." Before Daniel could respond, the door slid open. A Valorian guard gestured for them to follow. The tribunal hall was enormous. The ceiling rose hundreds of feet above them, decorated with images of Valorian conquest. Rows of seats held representatives from dozens of species, all watching in silence as the humans were led to the center of the floor dot at the far end of the hall. On a raised platform sat Grand Arbiter Zearthax. He was the oldest Valorian Daniel had ever seen, his scales faded to a dull gray, his eyes burning with cold intelligence. "Ambassador Daniel Carter of Earth," Zearthax said, his voice echoing through the vast space. "You have been summoned to answer for the crimes of your species." Daniel felt Katie tense beside him. He kept his own expression neutral. "What crimes would those be, Grand Arbiter?" he asked. Zearthax's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile. "The crime of trespassing on sacred Valorian territory. The crime of defiling our sovereign space with your presence." He leaned forward. "The punishment has already been carried out. Your colony on Seraph 7 has been destroyed. All 12,000 of your people are dead." The words hung in the air like poison. Daniel heard Katie's sharp intake of breath. He heard Nathan's low growl of anger. But he did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood there, looking into the eyes of the creature who had murdered 12,000 innocent people, and felt something cold and hard settle into his heart. This was not over. This was just the beginning. The tribunal hall had gone completely silent. Every eye was fixed on Daniel Carter, the human ambassador who had just done the unthinkable. He had said no to the Valorian Empire. Grand Arbiter Zearthax stood on his platform, his massive body trembling with rage. His clawed hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that the metal was bending under the pressure. "You will regret those words," Zearthax hissed. "Your entire species will regret them." Daniel did not flinch. He stood in the center of the hall, small and fragile compared to the towering aliens around him, but somehow more solid than any of them. "Perhaps," he said calmly. "But I do not think so." He took a step forward, and the Valorian guards moved to block him. Daniel ignored them. He was done being pushed around. He was done being treated like something less than a person. "Let me tell you something about humanity," Daniel said, his voice rising so that everyone in the hall could hear. "We are young. We only left our planet a few centuries ago. Compared to the ancient empires of this galaxy, we are children." Xyothax sneered. "Exactly. Children who need to learn their place. Children grow up," Daniel replied. "And we learn fast." He pointed at the holographic display that still showed the falsified boundary maps. "You think you are clever, Grand Arbiter. You think you can change the records, and no one will notice. You think you can murder 12,000 innocent people and call it justice." His voice grew harder. "But we noticed. We kept copies. We remembered." The Karathi delegates were watching with new interest now. The Selmari had stopped looking at the floor and were staring at Daniel with something that might have been hope. "You have ruled this galaxy through fear," Daniel continued. "You have crushed anyone who opposed you. You have made slaves of species that were old when your ancestors were still crawling in the mud." Xyothax roared with fury. "Enough! Guards, silence this creature." The guards moved toward Daniel, but he raised his hand and spoke quickly. "I invoke the right of final words under Section 7 of the Concord Charter. Any accused party may speak without interruption before judgment is rendered." The guards hesitated. They looked at Xyothax, uncertain. The Grand Arbiter's eyes burned with hatred, but he nodded slowly. The Charter was ancient law, older than the Valorian Empire itself. Even he could not violate it openly. "Speak your words," Xyothax said. "They will be your last." Daniel turned to face the assembled delegates. He looked at the Karathi, at the Somari, at all the species who had lived under Valorian rule for generations. "My people have a saying," he said. "Do not wake a sleeping giant. For 3,000 years, you have ruled this galaxy. For 3,000 years, species have bowed before you, afraid of your power. But you made a mistake, Grand Arbiter." He turned back to face Xyothax. "Ukavas, Listhais, you attacked Earth. You murdered our people. You expected us to submit like all the others." Daniel's voice dropped to something cold and hard. "We do not submit." He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a small device. The guards tensed, but it was not a weapon. It was a communication unit. "I am authorized by the United Earth government to deliver the following message," Daniel said formally. "Your demands for reparations are rejected. Your claims to our star systems are rejected. Your authority to govern humanity is rejected, now and forever." Xyothax laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass. "You reject? You have no power to reject anything. You are nothing but a primitive species with a handful of ships." "That is where you are wrong," Daniel said quietly. He activated the communication device. A holographic image appeared above his hand, showing a woman in a military uniform. Her face was stern, her eyes sharp, her gray hair pulled back tightly. "Secretary General Cole," Daniel said. "The Valorians have refused to negotiate. They have confirmed the destruction of Seraph 7 and demanded our submission." Margaret Cole's voice was cold as ice. "Their response is noted, Ambassador. Earth's response is now in effect." The image disappeared. Daniel tucked the device back into his jacket and looked at Xyothax with something close to pity. "What did you do?" the Grand Arbiter demanded. "What is this response?" Daniel took a deep breath. This was the moment. This was the choice that could not be taken back. "At this moment," he said, the Earth Defense Fleet is mobilizing. Every ship we have is being prepared for combat. Our planetary defense systems are coming online. Our people are being told what happened on Seraph 7. He paused to let the words sink in. And more importantly, a message is being broadcast across every communication channel in the galaxy. It contains the original treaty documents, the true boundary maps, and recorded evidence of Valorian officials ordering the destruction of our colony. Zyrthak's face changed. For the first time, Daniel saw something other than arrogance in those yellow eyes. He saw fear. "You would not dare," Zyrthak whispered. "You would not challenge us openly." "We already have," Daniel replied. "The galaxy is watching, Grand Arbiter. They are seeing the truth about what you did. They are seeing humanity refuse to kneel." He stepped closer to the platform, close enough that the guards could have killed him with a single blow. But they did not move. They were frozen, uncertain, watching their leader for guidance. "You have awakened Earth's wrath," Daniel said, his voice ringing through the hall. "And you will come to regret it." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, a sound began to build. It started with the Karathi delegates, a soft clicking that grew louder and louder. Daniel did not understand what it meant until Katie leaned close and whispered in his ear. "They are applauding," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "That is how the Karathi show approval." Other species joined in. The Silmari began to hum, a crystalline sound like wind chimes. The small furry delegates from a species Daniel did not recognize stomped their feet in rhythm. Not everyone participated. Some species remained silent, afraid of Valorian retaliation. But enough joined in that the message was clear. Humanity had done something that no one else had dared to do. They had stood up to the Empire. Zyrthak raised his hand, and the room fell silent again. His face had gone from rage to something more calculating, more dangerous. "You have made a grave error, Ambassador Carter," he said softly. "You think defiance will save your species? It will only make your destruction more painful." He turned to his aides. "Prepare the fleet. We will teach these humans a lesson they will never forget." Daniel nodded slowly. "We expected nothing less." He looked at Katie and Nathan standing loyally beside him. Then he looked back at Zyrthak. "We are going home now," Daniel said. "When your fleet arrives, we will be waiting." "And Grand Arbiter? Bring more ships than you think you need. You are going to need every single one of them." He turned and walked toward the exit, his small human delegation following close behind. The Valorian guards made no move to stop them. Perhaps they were too stunned. Perhaps they had finally realized that these small, soft creatures were more dangerous than anyone had imagined. As Daniel stepped through the door, he heard Zyrthak call after him. "You are making a mistake, human. You cannot win this war." Daniel paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Maybe not," he said. "But we are going to make sure you never forget trying." Then he was gone, walking toward his ship, toward the battle that would decide humanity's fate. The galaxy held its breath and waited. The silence in the tribunal hall lasted for what felt like an eternity. Daniel stood perfectly still, his face showing nothing of the rage that burned inside him. He could feel the eyes of 100 alien species watching him, waiting to see how the human would react. Grand Arbiter Zyrthak seemed pleased by the silence. He settled back in his massive chair, his clawed hands resting on the armrests like a king surveying his domain. "The evidence of your crime is clear," Zyrthak continued. "Your colony vessels entered Valorian space without permission. This is a violation of the sacred laws that have governed this galaxy for 3,000 years. A holographic display appeared in the center of the hall, showing a star map. Red lines marked what the Valorians claimed as their territory. A small dot pulsed at the edge of that territory, marking the location of Seraph 7. "As you can see," Zyathax said. Your colonists built their settlement within our borders. They were warned. They refused to leave. They paid the price for their arrogance. Daniel stared at the map. Something was wrong. He had studied the treaty documents 100 times. He knew every line, every boundary, every agreement that humanity had signed with the Galactic Concord. May I speak, Grand Arbiter? He asked, keeping his voice calm and respectful. Zyathax made a dismissive gesture. You may. Though I cannot imagine what you could say that would change the facts. Daniel took a step forward. The facts, Grand Arbiter, are not what you claim them to be. A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. The representatives of other species leaned forward in their seats, suddenly interested. The treaty between Earth and the Galactic Concord was signed 5 years ago, Daniel continued. I have a copy of that treaty right here. He reached into his jacket and produced a small data crystal. This crystal contains the original boundary maps, verified and sealed by neutral Concord observers. Would you like to see them? Zyathax's eyes narrowed. That will not be necessary. Valorian records are accurate. I am sure you believe they are, Daniel replied. But I would like the other delegates to see the truth for themselves. He activated the crystal before Zyathax could stop him. A second holographic display appeared beside the first, showing a different star map. The boundaries were clearly different. On this map, Seraph 7 was located in neutral territory, far from any Valorian claim. As you can see, Daniel said, the original treaty places Seraph 7 in unclaimed space. The colony was built legally, according to every agreement we signed. The murmur grew louder. Daniel saw the Karathi delegates, tall insect-like beings with compound eyes, consulting urgently among themselves. The Silmari, a species of crystalline humanoids, were pointing at both displays and comparing the differences. Zyathax rose from his chair, his scales flushing dark with anger. You dare to question Valorian records? You dare to suggest that we have been dishonest? I am not suggesting anything, Daniel said calmly. I am simply presenting evidence. The delegates can draw their own conclusions. Your evidence is irrelevant, Zyathax snarled. Valorian law supersedes all treaties with lesser species. What we claim is ours. What we say is true. This has always been the way of things. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. The way of things? You mean the Valorian way. Might makes right. Power determines truth. Yes, Zyathax said without hesitation. That is exactly what I mean. And you would do well to remember it, human. He gestured to his aides, who deactivated Daniel's holographic display. The original Valorian map remained, showing their false boundaries. The matter is settled, Zyathax announced. Earth will pay reparations for the offense caused by the Seraph 7 colonists. Additionally, as punishment for this continued defiance, Earth will cede 3 star systems to Valorian control. A gasp went through the hall. Even by Valorian standards, this was extreme. Furthermore, Zyathax continued, his voice cold with satisfaction, any human ship found outside designated travel corridors will be destroyed without warning. You will learn to stay in your place, or you will be eliminated entirely. Daniel heard Katie whisper behind him. This is insane. They cannot do this. But they could. That was the terrible truth. The Valorians had thousands of warships. They had conquered dozens of species. They had been the dominant power in this part of the galaxy for millennia. If they wanted to destroy humanity, there was very little anyone could do to stop them. The other delegates knew this. Daniel could see it in their eyes. The Karathi looked away when he glanced at them. The Silmari stared at the floor. Even the mighty traders of Nexus 9, who feared nothing and no one, seemed reluctant to meet his gaze. No one was going to help them. No one was going to speak up. Humanity was alone. Zyathax smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Do you accept these terms, Ambassador Carter? Or do we need to teach your species another lesson?" Daniel looked at the Grand Arbiter. He thought about the families on Seraph 7. He thought about the children who had been playing in the biodomes, dreaming of a future among the stars. He thought about the message this moment would send to every human being on Earth and in the colonies. If he accepted, humanity would become a slave species. They would spend the rest of their existence bowing to Valorian masters, paying tribute, giving up their worlds one by one until nothing was left. They would become what the Valorians wanted them to be: insects, cattle, nothing. But if he refused, the consequences could be even worse. War with the Valorian Empire. A war that humanity might not survive. Katie put her hand on his arm. "Whatever you decide," she said quietly, "we are with you." Nathan stepped up beside him. "All the way, Ambassador." Daniel took a deep breath. He thought about his father, a Marine who had taught him to never back down from a bully. He thought about his grandmother, who had survived worse things than this and emerged stronger. He thought about every human who had ever faced impossible odds and refused to quit. The Valorians expected him to grovel. They expected him to beg. They had seen 100 species do exactly that, broken and submissive before the power of the Empire. They did not understand humans at all. "Grand Arbiter," Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast hall, "I would like to respond to your demands." Xifax leaned forward eagerly. "Then speak. Accept your punishment, and perhaps we will show mercy." Daniel squared his shoulders. He looked around the hall at all the watching delegates, all the species who had given up their freedom and their dignity to survive under Valorian rule. Then he looked directly at Xifax and spoke the words that would change everything. "No." The single word echoed through the tribunal hall like a thunderclap. Xifax blinked. For a moment, he seemed unable to process what he had just heard. "What did you say?" he demanded. "I said no," Daniel repeated. "Earth does not accept your terms. Earth does not acknowledge your false evidence. Earth does not recognize your authority to murder innocent colonists and demand payment for the privilege." The hall erupted in chaos. Delegates were shouting. Guards were reaching for their weapons. Xifax was on his feet, his scales flushed almost black with fury. "You dare!" he roared. "You pathetic insect! You would defy the Valorian Empire?" Daniel stood his ground. Behind him, Nathan had his hand on his weapon, ready to die fighting if necessary. Katie was pale but steady, refusing to show fear. "I dare," Daniel said simply. "And I am just getting started." The room fell silent again, waiting for his next words. Daniel knew that whatever he said next would echo across the galaxy. It would define humanity in the eyes of every species watching. He was ready. The Valorian war fleet gathered in the dark space beyond the Orion corridor. 200 warships, each one a monster of metal and fire, armed with weapons that had destroyed entire civilizations. They moved in perfect formation, their commanders confident that this would be a short campaign. Admiral Kethrak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Hammer of Empire. He was old by Valorian standards, scarred from a dozen wars against a dozen species. He had never lost a battle. He did not expect to lose this one. "The humans have gathered their forces near the third planet of their system," his tactical officer reported. 60 ships. Kethrak made a sound of contempt. 60 ships against 200. This will not even qualify as a battle. It will be extermination. He gave the order to advance. 3 light years away, the Earth Defense Fleet waited. Admiral Lara Chun stood on the bridge of the carrier Victory. She was a small woman with sharp features and calm eyes. She had commanded ships in the colonial disputes, had fought pirates in the outer systems, had trained for this moment her entire life. She knew the odds. 60 against 200. By any reasonable calculation, humanity should surrender now and hope for mercy. But Lavra had read the reports from Seraph 7. She had seen the images of the destroyed colony, the bodies of children floating in the wreckage. There would be no surrender. There would be no mercy asked or given. All ships report ready, Admiral, her first officer said. Lara nodded. Launch the scout drones. I want to know the moment they enter the corridor. The waiting was the hardest part. Her crew moved quietly through their duties, checking systems, running simulations, preparing for a battle that many of them would not survive. Lavra walked among them, speaking a word of encouragement here, a joke there, trying to keep spirits high. She found Commander Greg Hayes in the fighter bay, running final checks on his squadron. Greg was young, barely 30, but he had the fastest reflexes in the fleet. He would lead the fighter attack when the battle began. Are your people ready? Lara asked. Greg looked up from his work. His face was serious, but his eyes burned with determination. Ready and eager, Admiral. We are not going to let those scaly monsters reach Earth. It will be dangerous, Lara said quietly. Many of you may not come back. We know, Greg replied. We all volunteered for this. Every pilot in my squadron has family on Earth. We know what we are fighting for. Lavra put her hand on his shoulder. Then give them hell, Commander. With pleasure, Admiral. The alert came 3 hours later. The Valorian fleet had entered the Orion corridor. They would arrive in 6 hours. Lara returned to the bridge and opened a channel to all ships. This is Admiral Chun. The enemy is approaching. In a few hours, we will face the greatest challenge our species has ever known. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I am not going to lie to you. The odds are against us. The Valorians have conquered dozens of species. They have ruled this galaxy for 3,000 years. They expect us to run or surrender. Her voice hardened. But we are not going to do either of those things. We are going to stand and fight. We are going to show them what happens when you attack humanity. She looked at the faces of her crew, at the determined expressions of men and women who were willing to die for their home. Remember Seraph 7, she said. Remember the 12,000 innocents they murdered. Remember their children, who never got to grow up. We fight for them today. We fight for every human being who ever looked at the stars and dreamed. She took a deep breath. All ships, prepare for battle. Victory or death. The channel closed. Laura sat in her command chair and watched the tactical display as the Valorian fleet drew closer. The battle began at 06 hours. Ship time. The Valorians came out of the corridor in standard attack formation. Their heavy cruisers in front, their carriers in the rear. They advanced with arrogant confidence, expecting the humans to scatter like frightened animals. Instead, the Earth fleet charged directly at them. All ships, open fire. Lavra ordered. The first wave of quantum disruption missiles streaked across the void. These were weapons the galaxy had never seen, developed in secret over 20 years of preparation. They did not explode. They disrupted the atomic bonds of matter itself, causing solid metal to simply fall apart. The lead Valorian cruisers did not even have time to react. One moment they were advancing proudly. The next moment they were clouds of metallic dust, their crews dying without ever understanding what had killed them. Admiral Kethrak stared at his display in disbelief. 15 ships destroyed in the first volley. Impossible. Return fire, he roared. Destroy them. The Valorian fleet unleashed their own weapons, plasma cannons and mass drivers and missiles that had killed millions. But the human ships were already moving, dancing through the fire with speed and agility that seemed impossible for vessels their size. Launch fighters, Lavra ordered. Commander Greg Hayes led his squadron out of the Victory's Bay. 200 small craft, spreading across the battlefield like angry hornets. They dove into the Valorian formation, too small and fast for the big ships to target effectively. Greg spotted a Valorian carrier and directed his wing toward it. Focus fire on the engine section. Take out their propulsion. His pilots obeyed without hesitation. They strafed the massive carrier, their weapons cutting through its armor like knives through paper. The carrier's engines exploded, sending it spinning out of control. One down, Greg reported. Moving to next target. The battle raged for 3 hours. The humans fought with a fury that the Valorians had never encountered. Every time they destroyed a human ship, 2 more seemed to take its place. Every time they killed a pilot, another one took the controls. It was as if the entire species had gone mad with rage. Admiral Kethrak watched his fleet being torn apart and felt something he had never experienced before: fear. "Sir," his tactical officer said, his voice shaking, "we have lost 112 ships. The humans have lost only 18. "Impossible," Kethrak whispered. "How are they doing this?" "Their weapons are unlike anything in our database," the officer replied. "And their pilots are flying like they do not care if they die." Kethrak stared at the display. The human fleet was still advancing, still fighting, still refusing to break. He had expected them to run when they saw the size of his force. He had expected them to beg for mercy when the killing started. Instead, they had attacked. They had charged directly into his guns and fought with an intensity that was almost frightening. "Order a withdrawal," Kethrak said finally. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "Sir, you heard me. All ships, retreat to the corridor. We will regroup and return with a larger force." The Valorian fleet began to pull back. The human ships pursued them for a while, picking off stragglers, before Laura finally ordered them to hold position. "Let them go," she said. "We have made our point." When the last Valorian ship disappeared into the corridor, a cheer went up across the fleet. They had done it. They had faced the most powerful empire in the galaxy, and Laura allowed herself a small smile. But she knew the war was not over. The Valorians would be back, with more ships, more weapons, more anger. But for today, humanity had proven something important. They were not insects to be crushed. They were not children to be punished. They were a species that would fight for their home, their families, their future, and they would never, ever give up. "All ships," Laura said quietly, "set course for home. We have earned some rest." The fleet turned and headed back toward Earth, leaving behind the wreckage of Valorian ambition floating in the dark void of space. The galaxy had seen what happened when you attacked humanity. It would never make that mistake again. The news of the Battle of Orion spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. On 1,000 worlds, in 1,000 languages, people whispered the same story. A young species called humanity had faced the Valorian Empire and won. On Keth Prime, the reaction was chaos. Grand Arbiter Zyrthax stood before the Valorian High Council, trying to explain how 200 warships had been defeated by 60. The council members stared at him with cold eyes, their scales dark with displeasure. "You assured us this would be a simple matter," the first elder said. "You told us the humans were primitive, weak, easily crushed." "I believe they were," Zyrthax replied, his voice less confident than before. "Our intelligence indicated they had no advanced weapons, no military experience, no significant threat capability." "Your intelligence was wrong," another counselor said sharply. "And now the entire galaxy knows it. Species that have been obedient for centuries are suddenly questioning our authority." Zyrthax felt sweat forming on his scales. "Give me another chance. I will gather a larger fleet. I will destroy them completely." The first elder rose from his seat. "You have had your chance, Zyrthax. Your failure has damaged the Empire more than any enemy in 3,000 years. He gestured to the guards. Remove him. He will face judgment for his incompetence. Zyrthax tried to protest, but the guards were already moving. They seized his arms and dragged him toward the door. He looked back at the council, at the faces of former allies who now regarded him as a liability. You do not understand, he shouted. The humans are dangerous. They will not stop until we are destroyed. Then we will find someone who can stop them, the first elder replied. You are no longer that person. The door closed behind Zyrthax, cutting off his final words. The council debated for 3 days. Some wanted to launch an all-out attack on Earth, throwing every ship in the Empire against the human homeworld. Others argued for caution, pointing out that such an attack might fail just as spectacularly as the first dot in the end. A new Grand Arbiter was chosen. His name was Kethis, and he was young by Valorian standards. More importantly, he understood something that Zyrthax never had. The galaxy was changing, and the Empire needed to change with it. We have 2 choices, Kethis told the council. We can continue this war and risk losing everything. Or we can find a way to end it with our dignity intact. You would negotiate with humans? One of the elders demanded. They are beneath us. They defeated 147 of our ships, Kethis replied calmly. If they are beneath us, then we have fallen very low indeed. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each council member. I propose we send a message to Earth. We will offer to discuss terms. Not surrender, not submission. Genuine negotiation between equals. The debate was fierce, but in the end, Kethis won. The message was sent. On Earth, Secretary General Margaret Cole received the Valorian communication with cautious optimism. She immediately contacted Ambassador Daniel Carter. They want to talk, she said. The question is, should we let them? Daniel considered the question carefully. He had seen the Valorians at their worst, had felt their contempt, had witnessed their cruelty. Part of him wanted to reject their offer, to continue the war until the Empire was broken. But he was a diplomat, not a soldier. His job was to find peace, not to seek revenge. We should at least hear what they have to say, he replied. But we go in with our eyes open. We know what they are capable of. 2 weeks later, Daniel returned to Keth Prime. This time, the reception was very different. There were no guards surrounding his ship, no holding chambers, no deliberate insults. A Valorian official met him at the landing pad and escorted him directly to the council chamber. Kethis was waiting for him. The new Grand Arbiter was smaller than Zyrthax had been, his scales a lighter shade of gray. His eyes were intelligent and watchful. Ambassador Carter, Kethis said, thank you for coming. I know it could not have been an easy decision. Daniel nodded carefully. Grand Arbiter, I hope this meeting will be more productive than my last visit. So do I, Kethis replied. He gestured for Daniel to sit. Let us speak plainly. The Empire made a mistake. Zyrthax acted rashly and without proper authority. The destruction of your colony was wrong. Daniel felt his heart skip. He had not expected such a direct admission. Go on. We cannot undo what was done, Kethis continued. But we can make amends. I am prepared to offer full reparations to the families of those who died on Seraph 7. I am also prepared to officially recognize Earth as a full member of the Galactic Concord, with all the rights and protections that status provides. And in return, Kethis spread his hands. Peace, an end to hostilities, a chance to build a new relationship between our peoples. Daniel studied the Valorian carefully. He had learned to read alien faces over the years, and he saw no deception in Kethis. The Grand Arbiter seemed genuine. I will need to consult with my government, Daniel said. But I believe we can find common ground. The negotiations took 3 months. There were arguments, disagreements, moments when it seemed like everything would fall apart. But in the end, a treaty was signed. The Valorians acknowledged their crime against Seraph 7. Reparations were paid to every family that had lost someone. A memorial was built on the site of the destroyed colony, honoring those who had died. More importantly, humanity was recognized as an equal member of the galactic community. No longer would they be treated as primitives, as insects, as creatures beneath notice. They had earned their place among the stars through blood and sacrifice. On the day the treaty was signed, Daniel stood on the observation deck of the Resolute and watched Keth Prime shrink in the distance. Katie joined him, standing quietly at his side. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. "The peace, I mean." Daniel thought about everything they had been through. The terror of Seraph 7, the defiance in the tribunal hall, the battle that had changed everything. "Honestly, I do not know," he admitted. "The Valorians have ruled through fear for thousands of years. It will not be easy for them to change." He turned to face her. "But we showed them something they had never seen before. We showed them that fear works both ways. They learned to fear us, and that changed the equation." Katie nodded slowly. "So what happens now?" "Now we go home," Daniel said. "We rebuild. We prepare for whatever comes next. And we never forget what we learned here." "What did we learn?" Daniel looked out at the stars, at the vast galaxy that had once seemed so hostile and unwelcoming. That we are not alone. That there are allies out there, species who admire what we did and want to stand with us. And most importantly, that humanity has a future among the stars, if we have the courage to claim it. The Resolute engaged its engines and leaped into the void. Behind them, the Valorian homeworld faded to a point of light, then disappeared entirely. On Earth, people looked up at the night sky with new eyes. The stars were no longer distant and cold. They were destinations, possibilities, promises of adventures yet to come. The children born after the Battle of Orion grew up hearing stories of Ambassador Carter and Admiral Chun and Commander Hayes. They learned about the brave souls of Seraph 7, whose deaths had awakened a sleeping giant. They understood that humanity had been tested and had emerged stronger. The galaxy would never forget the day a single human stood before the mightiest empire in existence and refused to kneel. They would never forget the battle that followed, or the peace that came after. And whenever a new species was tempted to dismiss humanity as weak or primitive, someone would always whisper a warning: "Be careful. Those are the humans. They do not surrender. They do not give up. And if you threaten their home, they will come for you with everything they have. They call it Earth's wrath, and you do not want to see it awaken. The end."